Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now before I begin, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. It was one of those afternoons when the sunlight falls lazily across the living room, painting everything in gold. The kind of day that makes you slow down, even if you didn't plan to. My house was unusually quiet that day. No television humming in the background, no radio chatter, just the soft ticking of the wall clock and the distant rustle of leaves outside. I had just poured myself a cup of tea when I heard the familiar creak of the gate. My grandson, Ethan, had stopped by after school. He was 16, tall, polite, and at that wonderful age where childhood still lingers behind the seriousness he tries to wear like armor. He stepped inside, holding his backpack loosely with one hand and an uncertain smile on his face. "Grandma," he said, "do you have a minute?" I smiled, pretending to be busy rearranging the fruit bowl. "For you. Always." He hesitated at the doorway, as if choosing the right words before stepping closer. "Can I sit?" I nodded, and he took his usual seat by the window. The sunlight caught his hair in such a way that for a brief moment I saw his father in him, my son when he was that age, filled with curiosity and unspoken thoughts. Ethan looked down at his hands. "I know you and Dad don't always see eye to eye," he began softly, "but I wanted to ask you something." That caught my attention. Usually he avoided family tension like a minefield. "What is it, sweetheart?" He looked up, eyes sincere. "Do you ever regret not saying how you really feel to people? Like when you had the chance?" The question hung in the air between us like a thread connecting two generations. I put my teacup down slowly, feeling the warmth through the porcelain. "That's a big question," I said. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged. "I don't know. I see how Dad gets quiet sometimes when he talks about Grandpa, and I wonder if he's holding something in. I don't want to be like that." His honesty disarmed me. Teenagers rarely open doors like that without reason. I studied his face, so young yet so thoughtful. "It's good to think about these things," I said, "but regret, that's something you learn to handle over time. It doesn't always mean you did something wrong. Sometimes it just means you cared deeply." Ethan nodded, though his expression was clouded with something unspoken. I sensed there was more beneath the surface. "Is there someone you haven't spoken to?" I asked gently. He looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "Not really. It's just, sometimes I feel like people don't really see each other. Like they talk, but they don't listen." The simplicity of his words struck me harder than I expected, maybe because I knew that feeling too well, the times when my words had gone unheard, or when I'd stayed silent to keep the peace. I leaned back in my chair. "You know, when your father was your age, he used to say the same thing," I said with a faint smile. He thought no one understood him either, but I did. I just didn't say it enough. Ethan's eyes met mine again, softer now. "I think people forget that you used to be young too." That made me laugh, but there was a catch in my voice. "Oh, I haven't forgotten. The world just makes you grow quieter as you get older." He tilted his head. "But you still listen better than anyone I know." Something about the way he said it made my throat tighten. There was no flattery in his tone, just quiet sincerity. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "That means more to me than you think." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sunlight shifted slightly, warming our hands. Outside, the sound of a passing car faded into the distance. It was one of those rare silences that didn't feel empty but full, like words had been spoken without sound. Ethan finally stood, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. "I'm glad I came," he said. "I just wanted to say that." Before I could respond, he leaned down and hugged me. A brief, awkward teenage hug, but one filled with meaning. And just like that, he was gone, leaving the faint scent of his shampoo in the air and a weight in my chest I couldn't quite describe. I sat there for a long time after he left, staring at the spot where he'd been sitting. The house felt different, still quiet, but now filled with something gentle and alive. His words echoed in my mind. People don't really see each other. And in that moment, I realized maybe that afternoon wasn't just a visit. Maybe it was a reminder from him, from life itself, that the conversations we think are small can sometimes be the ones that stay with us the longest. When I finally got up to wash my empty teacup, the light had faded to a soft orange, but my heart felt lighter, like something old had been lifted, and something new had quietly taken its place. The next afternoon, I found myself glancing at the window more often than usual. The air had cooled since yesterday, carrying that quiet promise of fall. I brewed an extra cup of tea, though I told myself it was just in case Ethan stopped by again. Truthfully, part of me hoped he would. His words from the day before still lingered in my thoughts like a melody I couldn't forget. He didn't come that day, but he called. It startled me at first. He rarely called unless he needed help with something. "Grandma," he said, his voice softer than usual, "do you mind if I come over tomorrow? I want to show you something." Of course, I agreed. I could hear something new in his tone, a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The next morning, I cleaned the living room and set out some of his favorite cookies. It's funny how habits never fade. No matter how old they get, grandmothers still want to make things just right. When he arrived, he was carrying a small notebook, the kind with a worn blue cover and frayed edges. "What's this?" I asked as he sat down. He smiled shyly. "I've been writing things, like thoughts. Stuff I can't really say to anyone." I nodded slowly, touched by the trust behind that sentence. "Writing helps," I said softly. "It's a way of talking without being interrupted." He flipped open the notebook, hesitating for a moment before sliding it toward me. "Can you read one? Just one entry." I looked at him, unsure if I should. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I think I want you to." The handwriting was neat, careful, so unlike the rushed scrawl of most teenagers. The entry began with a simple line. Sometimes I wonder if people forget that silence can say more than words. My eyes followed the sentences, each one revealing small glimpses of his thoughts, his worries about growing up, about not wanting to disappoint his father, about feeling like he had to be strong all the time. By the time I finished, I felt a lump forming in my throat. He wasn't asking for advice. He was asking to be understood. I looked up and saw him watching me anxiously. "Ethan," I said quietly, "these words, they're beautiful. You have a gift." He looked surprised. "Really?" "I just write what I feel." "That's exactly why they're beautiful," I replied. "You're saying what most people are too afraid to admit." He smiled, relief softening his face. "Dad wouldn't get it," he said after a pause. "He's busy trying to make everything perfect." I sighed gently. "Your father means well. He just grew up thinking perfection was the only way to be safe. Life taught him that mistakes cost too much." Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Do you think he'll ever change?" "Maybe not in the way you want," I said thoughtfully. "But people can surprise you when they feel truly seen, just like you did yesterday." He looked at me curiously. "You mean when I said people don't see each other?" I nodded. "Yes, you made me think about my own life, about all the moments I stayed quiet when I should have spoken, or spoke when I should have listened." He smiled faintly. "You're the best listener I know." Those words touched something deep inside me. It's strange how a young boy's kindness can reach places that years of conversation never did. Listening, I said, isn't just about hearing words. It's about feeling them. We sat there for a while, flipping through the notebook together. Some pages were filled with short poems, others with bits of reflection, about school, about friends, about the world changing faster than he could understand. Each line revealed a young man quietly learning how to navigate the noise of growing up. Before he left, he asked, "Grandma, do you think it's okay if I read one of these at school someday? Maybe for the writing club?" "Of course," I said, smiling. "But remember, you don't need anyone's approval to share what's true." He grinned. "You sound like one of those wise people in movies." I laughed. Maybe I've watched too many. As he walked to the door, I caught myself saying, "Ethan?" He turned and I added, "Thank you for trusting me with your words." He gave a small nod, that quiet kind of acknowledgement only the heart understands, and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. When the door closed, I picked up the notebook again. The pages seemed to hum with life, like they carried not just his thoughts, but a piece of his growing soul. I realized then that sometimes our grandchildren don't just inherit our eyes or our smile. They inherit our longing to be understood, our quiet hopes, our unfinished sentences. That evening, as the golden light faded behind the trees, I wrote something of my own for the first time in years, not for anyone else to read, but to remind myself that words, when shared with love, have the power to heal across generations. 2 weeks passed before Ethan came by again. I wasn't sure if he'd forgotten about our last talk, or if life had simply swept him up, as it does with young people. But one Saturday afternoon, just as I was tending to my garden, I heard the creak of the gate and looked up to see him standing there, holding something behind his back. "Don't peek yet," he said, grinning. His eyes were brighter this time, full of purpose. I wiped my hands on my apron and smiled. Should I close my eyes then? "Maybe," he laughed, stepping closer. "Okay, now." He pulled out a small framed paper, a printed poem, surrounded by doodles and little notes in his handwriting. The title read, "The Things We Don't Say." My breath caught. I knew immediately what it was. "You read this at school?" I asked, voice low, almost reverent. He nodded proudly. "For the writing club showcase." People clapped, Grandma. They really liked it. My teacher even said it made her tear up. I felt my chest tighten in that familiar way when pride and emotion mixed together. "Ethan, that's wonderful," I said, taking the frame from his hands. "You've turned your thoughts into something that touches others." "That's no small thing." He sat down on the porch steps beside me. The air smelled of soil and blooming jasmine, and for a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "I didn't just write it for school. I wrote it for Dad. I think he needed to hear it." That surprised me. "Did you show him?" He nodded. "Last night." He didn't say much at first, just stared at the paper. Then he said, "You sound like your grandmother." I laughed softly, though my eyes were wet. "He said that?" "Yeah," Ethan smiled. "He told me he used to write too, but he stopped after Grandpa passed away. Said it hurt too much to think." My heart ached hearing that. My son had always been strong, maybe too strong for his own good. "And how did it end?" I asked. Ethan looked at me with quiet satisfaction. He asked if he could come next time. Maybe we could all talk. For a moment, I couldn't find my words. The sunlight flickered between the trees, and I thought of all the years of silence between my son and me. The arguments, the distance, the unspoken love that still held us together despite it all. And now, through the voice of a 16-year-old boy, a bridge had been built. I reached over and brushed a stray leaf off Ethan's shoulder. "You've done something remarkable, I said. "You've reminded your father, and me, that words can bring people home." He looked down modestly. "I didn't do much." "Oh, you did," I replied gently. You listened, and you spoke when it mattered." He smiled, and I noticed how much older he looked in that moment, not in years, but in spirit. There was a calmness about him, a quiet maturity that made me realize he was stepping into the world in his own way. As we sat together, I felt an urge to tell him something I'd never said before. "Ethan, when your father was your age, he and I argued a lot. He thought I didn't understand him. Maybe I didn't, but I never stopped loving him, even in silence. Sometimes love just forgets how to speak." Ethan listened carefully, eyes soft with understanding. "Maybe it just needed a translator," he said with a smile. I laughed, a sound that felt light and real. "Maybe you're right." We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his friends, his dreams, even a girl in his class who liked the same music he did. There was a new openness between us, an ease that hadn't been there before. As he got ready to leave, he said, "Dad's off work next weekend. Maybe we can come by together." He said he wants to bring some old photos from before I was born. That promise hung in the air like sunlight through curtains, warm and full of possibility. After he left, I stayed outside a little longer, the framed poem resting in my lap. The words, "The things we don't say," glowed faintly under the soft afternoon light, and I realized something profound. Sometimes life doesn't give us grand reunions or dramatic apologies. Sometimes it gives us a quiet conversation, a framed poem, a young boy's courage, and that's enough to change everything. As the evening came, I went inside and placed the frame on the mantel, right beside an old photo of my son as a boy, the one where he's holding a toy car and grinning, unaware of the man he'd become or the walls he'd build. I stood there for a while, feeling time fold in on itself, the past, the present, the unspoken love, all gathered in one peaceful moment. The house felt alive again, as if it too was waiting for next weekend, when the silence might finally give way to words once lost, but now finding their way home. The following weekend arrived with an early autumn chill. I woke up before dawn, too restless to sleep. The house felt expectant, as if it too was holding its breath. I baked a batch of cinnamon rolls, Ethan's favorite, and set the table with the good china, the one I used to bring out only for holidays. Today felt like one. By mid-morning, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. My heart fluttered the way it used to before family gatherings. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to see Ethan standing there, smiling shyly, and beside him, my son Daniel. He looked older than I remembered. His hair had more gray, his shoulders more weight from years I hadn't been part of. Yet when our eyes met, something inside me softened immediately. "Hi, Mom," he said, almost awkwardly. "Hi, Danny," I replied, my voice unsteady. Ethan, sensing the weight in the air, broke the silence with his bright, grounding presence. "We brought something." He lifted a small cardboard box and carried it inside. I motioned them toward the living room, the one place that had stayed the same through every chapter of our lives. The sunlight poured through the curtains, catching dust motes that floated lazily like old memories made visible. Inside the box were old photographs, letters, and tiny keepsakes, frozen moments of a life once shared. Daniel set the box down on the coffee table and exhaled deeply. "I thought maybe we could go through them together," he said. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I nodded, and we began. There were pictures of him as a child, his first day of school, his baseball games, his high school graduation. Photos of my late husband smiling as he held Daniel on his shoulders, full of life. As we flipped through them, laughter began to sneak in between the pauses. Small, cautious at first, then freer. Ethan sat between us, watching quietly, his gaze moving from one face to another. It struck me then how much he had bridged without even realizing it. When we reached the bottom of the box, Daniel picked up a yellowed envelope. "This one's yours," he said, handing it to me. I frowned, recognizing my own handwriting. "Oh my, this is the letter I wrote to you when you went off to college. I thought you lost it." "I didn't," he said softly. "I just couldn't read it then. I wasn't ready." I unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. The paper was fragile, the ink slightly faded, as I read my own words from decades ago, words of pride, fear, and love. I felt tears slip down my cheeks. When I looked up, Daniel's eyes were glassy too. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly. "For the years I stayed away, for thinking I had to do everything alone." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You don't have to apologize. Life pulls us in different directions, but it always finds a way to bring us back." He squeezed my hand, his voice rough. "You always said that." "Because it's true," I whispered. For a while, the three of us sat there in silence. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, and a single leaf drifted past the window. The house, once so still, now pulsed with something alive, something that felt a lot like peace. After lunch, Daniel stood by the window, looking out at the garden. "You still have the old swing," he said. Of course, I smiled. "It's waiting for a new coat of paint." He chuckled softly. "Ethan and I could do that next weekend." Ethan turned to me, excitement lighting up his face. "Yeah, we could make it like it used to be. Maybe hang lights too." I laughed, feeling warmth rise in my chest. That sounds perfect. Later, when they left, I stood at the doorway watching them walk to the car. Daniel placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder as they spoke, their voices low and comfortable. The sight filled me with a quiet pride. 3 generations, each healing something they didn't even realize had been broken. When their car disappeared down the street, I went back inside. The house was quiet again, but it was no longer the same silence that used to weigh on me. It was the kind of silence that follows laughter, the kind that feels full instead of empty. I glanced at the framed poem on the mantel, "The Things We Don't Say." The words caught the late afternoon light, glowing gently. And for the first time in many years, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence with sound. I sat down with my cup of tea and let my thoughts rest. I thought about how, sometimes, the most unexpected moments, a question, a visit, a handwritten poem, can open doors that seemed sealed forever. That afternoon, I realized something simple yet profound. Love doesn't always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it returns quietly, through the voice of a grandson, the courage of a son, and the grace of an afternoon that changed everything. And as the sun dipped low, casting gold across the garden, I whispered softly to the empty room, "Thank you, Ethan, for reminding us to speak and to listen." Then I smiled, knowing he'd never fully understand how much those few words had done, not just for me, but for all of us.